Look! Look, the dynamic duo!
Hey guys, welcome to the Dynamic Duo. I'm Franz.
I'm Kevin. Welcome back to the Batcave and Avengers Tower, everybody.
So we wanted to, because, you know, the truth of the matter is that this is a very involved question with many different points of views. And certainly I want to make sure that I give the impression that when I say something, you know, it's a matter of opinion rather than facts. There are certain things that I will say that are factual, but certainly if it's an opinion and I try to explain the basis of that opinion, you keep it as what it is. We wanted Kevin to continue the conversation that we were having about Stan Lee and his legacy and what he meant. And I know there are certain points that you wanted to add, and certainly there are certain points that I wanted to add to that discussion as well. So what did you want to say?
Well, there had been some question, partner, about whether or not what I said concerning Lee having anything to do with DC was real. And ladies and gentlemen, believe me, I wouldn't have made the statement if it weren't. Stan did in fact work with DC, even though it was a brief period. He did work with them. One of the major contributions that he made was for a limited run series called Just Imagine. It was a reworking of a number of the DC characters, primarily Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and a couple of members of the Justice League. And they were very akin to Marvel's What If, in a manner of speaking. The other thing that Stan did for them was a special series of books called the DC Universe. And these were also reworked tales and stories of how Stan looked at DC and what he thought they should have done or changes that needed to be made.
Now, are you talking early on or are you talking later on?
It was a little bit later, although he did have some involvement with DC in the early days, because that's how he and Bob Kane ended up becoming friends, because they met while basically going in and out of the DC headquarters when Bob Kane and Bill Finger had gotten started with Batman. Stan did not do a lot for them in the early days, but he was there. And like I said, it was a matter of a lot of what he did. He tried to bring a Marvel-esque flavor to a lot of their pre-existing material. And I actually want to make a major point with this. I don't want anybody to forget that even in the earlier days, and I'm not even talking about when he was a younger man, when DC started the whole, you know, Superman versus whoever and Batman versus whoever kind of thing, of course, the very first forte into this was Superman versus Spider-Man. And Stan Lee, of course, was a driving force behind that book. They also followed that one up with Batman versus the Hulk at some point during the early to mid 70s, and there were others as well. So in the sense of, did Stan Lee ever have anything to do with Marvel? Even from a with DC, even from a collaborative effort, they had worked together. So, you know, a lot of people, even though you can have your opinion about, you know, which company is better, which one holds up more and what have you, that's fine. But don't, how can I put this? Don't lock yourself into, oh, these people don't work together, they never have, and that kind of, stop thinking that way, because it did happen.
This is a very important point that you make, because the truth of the matter is that, listen, the fact is, there's a lot of information out there, and we don't know all of the information, and we have to be open to learning new information. And certainly, I said earlier that this is based on my opinion. This is what's very important to me personally. Opinions are subject to change based on the information. If I don't know something and I learn it, then I reserve the right to change my opinion. And that's perfectly fine. We seem to live in a world where once we express something, it has to be that. And no matter, what evidence is presented to us, we're not allowed to change our minds. That doesn't make sense to me. And so when I state something as a matter of opinion, it means that if I were to learn new data, I may change that opinion to something else. And that's perfectly fine. The other thing that I'd say is we're clearly responding to Infinity 99, who is one of our subscribers. And Infinity, I just want you to know that, we love your input. Sometimes you discuss things with people who don't know what the hell they're talking about, who are just opinionated, whose opinions don't make any sense. And to be honest with you, you're the furthest thing from that. I love the discourse that we have, even though it's too much homework, man. I can't be typing up the stuff. That's why we're inserting it by video. But we love it, and it's coming from a not only knowledgeable source, but a research source. But this is an opportunity to learn, just as I learned from some of the things that you say. This is an opportunity to learn that what we thought we believed is not necessarily the case. And Stanley did, in fact, have the opportunity to work with DC. Here is what I'm going to suggest, because again, the discussion is Stanley's legacy and what did he do, what did he not create. And I am of the firm opinion that Stanley is in fact the father of it all, and that he is in fact responsible for Marvel's drive. And what I'm about to say, Kevin, may be blasphemous to some people. And I want to be clear that I'm offering it as a food for thought. I'm not arguing as fact, and I'm certainly not trying to just distract anyone or detract anyone's accomplishments, but I think it's a legitimate point of consideration. And I'm going to explain why I think it's a legitimate point of consideration. Jack Kirby was always a good artist. He'd been a good artist before he got to DC. He'd had some measure of success. Now, we have to be careful when we say success. Are we talking about Marvel level success? Are we talking about Hulk success? Or are we talking about he was a working artist whose art was liked, as there were other working artists whose art was liked? For sure, what I'm talking about is Marvel level of success. And he hadn't achieved that without Marvel, both before and after the creation of the initial set of superheroes of Marvel Comics. And as good as Jack Kirby was, and again, remember that I consider Jack Kirby a genius. Here's what we know. We know two things. And I know this I know for a fact, and I could prove it. And I will by demonstrating the examples of what I'm talking about. Kirby's artwork grew substantially better from, forget about pre-Marvel work, from Fantastic Four #1 to Fantastic Four #50. His storytelling, the dynamic display of the panels, everything increased and got better. And he attained his genius status, at least now, this is a matter of opinion, as far as I'm concerned, in those pages, in those later pages of Marvel comic books, not in Fantastic Four #1, which looks like this, and not in Thor #1, which looks like this, or the first early issues of Hulk, which look like this, but rather later on when his artwork developed and when he was doing brilliant stuff. Here's the thing that I would like to posit. We also know that Stan Lee was an art director and that he provided art direction. We know that for a fact. We know it very early on. Spider-Man #1, Stan Lee was telling Ditko, hey, Ditko, you need to change this panel here. You need to change this panel there. There's evidence of that. Are we talking about evidence? So Stan Lee was an art director from the very beginning. We also know, for example, that another piece of information that most people are not aware, the draft, Stan Lee's draft for the Fantastic Four exists. And it was actually published in the pages of Marvel comic books to say, this is how it all came to be. So that evidence is there. Furthermore, there's video, and I will show clips of that shows Stan Lee working with John Buscema. It's on YouTube, where you could see Stan Lee explaining the difference between Marvel art and DC level art.
Take a close look at these next two drawings of the dramatically demoniacal Dr. Doom. The illustration on top is rather ordinary. It lacks those special qualities which distinguish a Marvel panel. However, the second illustration is drawn in the dynamic Marvel style. Let's see what the differences are. Basically, there's nothing wrong with the top figure, but you can see how the one below is more exaggerated. Doc's arms and legs are heavier, more imposing. His feet are planted further apart, giving more majesty to his stance. His tunic is flaring, denoting action even though he's standing still. His chest is larger, and his hands are bigger and more powerful. The differences are subtle, but this is the way Marvel would do it. Train your eye to catch these elusive but essential variations. Still, there are exceptions to every rule. I'm sure you recognize the lovable Thing, but did you know he's only 6 heads high? And here's the Kingpin, barely 5 heads high. You see, the trick is to make him look squat without making him look like a panty waist. Incidentally, the smaller the head in proportion to the body, the heavier and more bulky the body will seem. And now that we've studied the figure, here's what you've all been waiting for. Action. It's a Marvel specialty, a Marvel trademark. Now sharpen your pencil, Pilgrim, because here's where we separate the men from. Both of these figures are rough sketches of someone running. But notice how much more dramatically this figure is moving. Why? Because his center line has more swing, impelling him forward with force and urgency. Now the same is true here. Both figures depict a reaction to a punch in the jaw. This figure is perfectly clear, but it simply isn't done in the Marvel style. It lacks the movement and the sharply curved center line of the other one. Notice how this figure is looser. The legs are bent and thrusting backwards as the arms jut forward. Notice how the head follows the center line, completing a graceful, fluid curve. Now that's the Marvel way, and the same rules apply to figures which are just standing. In these examples, the smaller figures are okay, but just okay. They're not particularly dramatic, they're not overly heroic, and most importantly, they're not very interesting. But the larger figures, showing the same poses, are much more dramatic and heroic. Consequently, they're more interesting. Here are some more examples. The variations may not seem to be major, and yet, as simple a device as thrusting the head farther forward or spreading the legs farther apart can make all the difference. They're simple, loose, free and easy, and although each was done with just a few sketchy lines, they're all Marvel-style drawing. Here we see Dr. Strange entering a room. It's a flat, unexciting camera angle, nothing dramatic or unusual about it, but by changing the camera angle, see how the scene has a sense of urgency, of impending drama. Now here's good old J. Jonah Jameson yelling at Peter Parker on the phone. It's okay, but in a word, blah. Now, look at the intensity of this angle. Poor Petey is really getting it now. And here's Dr. Doom, being his usual rotten self. It tells the story, but nothing more. New camera angle, new Dr. Doom. You see, it's more menacing, it's more compelling. In a word, we now have a better layout.
Let's see camera angles the way any ordinary comic book company might do it, compared with the Marvel style. We'll use an Avengers story as an example. Here's how it would look in an average comic book.
Here, a monster is breaking into Avengers headquarters. Next, a reaction shot of our three heroes. And here we see Cap, Iron Man, and the Vision rushing to do battle. Now that's old Shellhead taking a swing at the big bad behemoth. And here we see the monster about to do our hero irreparable bodily harm. Now, Cap and the Vision are pondering their next move. These panels are drawn okay. They tell the story, the characters are recognizable, but they're lacking in raw drama and sheer excitement.
That's because most of the layouts are too vertical, too straight up and down, and the heroes are too stiff. They lack the power that Marvel Comics have.
You know, we could go on forever, but it's easier just to compare and see how it's done the Marvel way. For example, look at this close-up of the monster breaking in. He looks like a monster. He's dangerous, menacing, super strong, and deadly. And the three heroes aren't standing around like a trio of simpletons. With Iron Man in front, there's a feeling of movement here due to the placement of the figures. There's more action than the simple looking straight on panel. See the action, the drama, the feeling of power generated by our heroes? There's no comparison to the other example's uninspired side shot. Iron Man slugging the monster the way a superhero should, like he means it. Here, he doesn't look like a ballet dancer, like in the other version. Are you starting to get the picture? Look here. You can almost feel the power as Iron Man struggles to break free. Finally, the two Avengers look much more graceful, and the tilt of their bodies gives the feeling of far more urgency and excitement. Now, without any comments from us, see if you can tell why the second version of the next examples are infinitely better than the first.
Watch for interesting perspective shots and variety in the size of the figures, and less emphasis on putting everything in the center of the panels.
And if you still can't tell the difference between the fair layouts and the good ones, keep studying. I mean, we don't want you to end up working for the competition.
The storytelling approach of Stan Lee versus Marvel. Now, Stan Lee was not an artist. He was an art director. And so what he was able to do is work with very, very talented artists to bring that vision to light. And he explains that very, very well. There's also plenty of videos of Stan Lee explaining his approach. And later on, we're going to do another show about this, talking about the different generations of comic books. But there's video evidence of Stan Lee, early evidence of Stan Lee explaining his approach, that he was writing comic books from 5-year-old to 95-year-olds. And that was his approach. He didn't want to take it for granted. He didn't want it to be silly. And he wanted to inject personality flaws and so on and so forth. And so Stan Lee was not only a visionary with respect to that. I don't think there could be an argument for that. And he was also an art director with respect to that as well. And that is backed by evidence. So here's what I'd like to propose. Is it possible that the growth in Kirby's art came from, and this is blasphemous, Stan Lee's influence, Stan Lee's art direction, Stan Lee's direction to Marvel, to Kirby? Because keep in mind, that art direction continued, and it was also effective with non-Kirby artists. So it wasn't just Kirby, but it was the other artists. It was the John Romitas, it was the John Buscema's, it was the Sal Buscema's, it was a whole bunch of people who were influenced by the Marvel way. Which encompassed a lot of things, which Stan Lee, I hope we agree, is responsible for. I don't know that we are, but I think he is. And so that's what I'm positing. And I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I absolutely positively believe that Kirby was influenced by Stan without question. And Stan's platform that created the Marvel method, as he used to put it, is in the golden era of what Marvel Comics was. He was the one that did create that platform. There's no question about the Marvel way of doing things, even though others were responsible for it as well. And they helped build upon it and create it and build on those worlds. That portion of it did indeed come from Stan. And until communication between the two giants, meaning Kirby and Lee, broke down, I would say yes, without question, Kirby's work was absolutely influenced by what Stan had kind of laid down and said, okay, this is the way it has to be. Now, in that same step, I think because of the power of Jack Kirby's work, it changed a lot of how Stan put pen to paper.
Beautifully said. I was just about to say the same thing. Beautifully said and absolutely true. Please go on.
Then, but yeah, I really do think that within the artwork, especially from Kirby in the beginning, and then others as time went on, you know, your John Romita's, and Steve Ditko's and what have you. I think that all of that combined is what made Marvel Marvel. Yes. And I think as the driving force of it all, Stan kind of looked even deeper into not only Kirby's art, but everybody else's, and was like, okay, these guys are literally pulling these characters off of these pages. They were becoming more and more and more powerful, and I don't mean just in terms of superpowers. I mean in terms of the way that expressions were being captured, the way that action sequences were laid out, even the way that dramatic scenes were laid out. I just think at some point he sat down and said, we can intensify this even more based on what you guys are putting down. And I think as a combination, we as the public benefited from it without question.
I couldn't agree with you more. We fall into this category of either or. You know, it's like either you're on Stan Lee or Jack Kirby, or either you're DC or Marvel, as you said earlier. And by no means is that what our position is. And I'm so glad you brought up this point. Saying the things that I say or that we say about Stan Lee in no way detracts from Jack Kirby. No way. And I do also agree with you 1,000%, 1,000%, that Kirby's dynamicism, his artwork, the power of his artwork influenced Stan Lee to say, oh, wow, this is the way it should be done. 100%. And I think this is when geniuses collaborate. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. Why do I regard Stan Lee so highly? Because in that relationship, and there is no argument here. Stan Lee was the director. He was the vision. He was the editor-in-chief, the writer. He was. You can't take that away from him. And he was doing it not just with Kirby, but with the other artists that he was working with. And so while, yes, Kirby may have absolutely influenced them and said, hey, when you do a punch, this is the way it should be done. Because Kirby, while he wasn't Kirby, was already Kirby, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. And so that Kirby was expanded upon by a Stan Lee, which made Stan Lee realize this is the way to go. John Romita, next time you do a panel, make sure it's X, Y, and Z. And let's make sure that Marvel comic books are presented in this fashion. Again, what Stan Lee put forward were two aspects of the Marvel method. One is treat the material with a certain degree of respect and have character development. And second is what's the word, dynamicism, that, you know, like make it dynamic, make the panels dynamic. And again, the video shows that this is exactly what we're talking about. So it's melded. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's a really, it's a collaboration of both, you know?
The original Spider-Man cartoon that was done in the 60s and the original Fantastic Four from the 60s, the animated series, they literally took pages of the books and said, did you see what we did here? This is what the animators need. This is what we need to make these shows work.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. We forget, and again, we forget that when we talk about success, Marvel, under Stan Lee's direction, was a nuclear explosion. From Fantastic Four on, it was a nuclear explosion. And that wasn't there before. And it was immediate. And it was huge. And it was one of those explosions that was building upon itself and building upon itself and building upon itself in a powerful, powerful way. It was an unstoppable engine. And you're absolutely right. Whenever that thing was, you know, those cartoons, they were early. They were like within a few years of Spider-Man's creation, within a few years of Fantastic Four's creation, and they were already there. Whereas the Flash, who existed before that, didn't have his own cartoon, at least not to my knowledge, you know? And so it was a nuclear explosion. And how do you not credit Stan Lee? Because he's the only common denominator of that explosion. You know what I mean? He's the only common denominator of that explosion. Everybody else was working before, no explosion. Oh, they were successful. They were working. They were liked, but it was an explosion. Stan Lee gets involved and the thing blows up. And to be honest with you, let's talk seriously. Since Stan Lee's vision has left, when did Stan Lee leave direct involvement with Marvel? It was the late 80s, early 90s. What happened to comic books in the late 80s and in the 1990s? It's literally started to deteriorate. And we're going to do another show about that. And I hope you guys join us. But it's literally started to deteriorate to where it is today, which is in terrible form. The superheroes are doing incredibly well. The comic book industry is in terrible trouble. You know, single comic books were selling what all Marvel comic books couldn't sell today. All of them combined. This may be not completely accurate, but you get the point of what I'm trying to make. And that started happening the moment Stan Lee stepped away. We gotta understand that. And why? Because from that point on, and we are going to talk about that, the vision, we started getting away from Stan Lee's vision of those characters, and we started adapting other people. So listen, guys, look, it's a matter of opinion. Certainly I respect other people's opinion. You know, let us know what you think. Let us know your opinions, and we go from there. This is not a discussion of hate, and at least we hope that you understand our point of view, and that you'll join us next time, at least for the opinions on the generational issue.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you don't, we can't go to bed.